defied a government ban on parades and came into violent conflict with British troops in the center of Londonderry.
Nigel Farage is currently in the hot seat. The man who once promised to be the shield of the British people is now under scrutiny for breaking promises and entering what many call appeasement mode. While the establishment ignores the sleaze on steroids in London, the real Islamic takeover of Britain is being debated at 25 grand dinners with the Pakistani community. But tonight, the tide has turned. The king farmer, Rupert Lowe, has decided that enough is enough. After being kicked out of Reform UK for wanting to deport communities that cover up rape gangs, Lowe is launching a sovereign rebellion from his farm. He isn't talking about refining the system, he is talking about the reversal of a generation. Is Farage right that we lose by 2050 if we alienate Islam, or is the king farmer finally telling the truth the elite want buried? To understand the hot seat Farage finds himself in, you have to look at the nub of the issue. The Muslim population in Britain is growing by about 75% every 10 years. Farage has reportedly admitted that if we politically alienate this bloc, we will lose by 2050. This shift towards appeasement, marked by appointing a Muslim Home Secretary and refusing to deport rape gang communities, has created a great divorce on the right. Critics say Farage needs Muslim votes to sweep the next election, but in doing so, he has abandoned the very patriots who put him there. The question isn't about skin colour. It's about a country that has become unrecognisable under the Boris wave and the Blair-Gordon legacy. The most visceral nail in this story happened at 9:30 p.m. on a Friday night. Armed police arrived unannounced at Rupert Lowe's farm. 3 vehicles and 4 armed officers. Because of what Lowe calls Zia Yusuf's lies, his legally held gun collection was confiscated. It was so large it required a wheelbarrow to haul away. Lowe alleges this witch hunt was supported by the Reform leadership because they didn't like his comments on mass deporting animalistic savages who gay-murked young girls. While the Prince of Darkness in Westminster avoids investigation for £500 billion leaks, a patriot farmer is treated like a criminal for advocating for the safety of women and children. Lowe's response is the launch of Restore Britain, a party of business leaders, soldiers and doctors, not failed ministers. Their priority is unrelenting. Every single illegal migrant will be securely detained and deported. If you cannot speak English, claim benefits, or actively hate our way of life, the message is simple: you must leave. But Restore Britain goes further than Farage ever dared. They are calling for a total ban on the burqa, the outlawing of Sharia law, and a legislated end to halal and kosher slaughter on British soil. It is a plan to reimpose a Christian-based rule of law and stop the relentless creep that Farage is accused of appeasing. Nigel Farage may still have his profile on X, but Rupert Lowe has the dirt under his fingernails and a 10% lead over the Liberal Democrats in the latest polls. We are witnessing a deadlock between a pragmatic reform that looks like the establishment and a radical restoration that looks like the future. The Islamic takeover narrative is being challenged by a man who refuses to tell comforting lies. The curiosity of the viewer shouldn't be about whether Farage is a Zionist prince or a colonizer. It should be about whether there is anything left of the old Britain to save. The last orders for the old guard have been called. The silence from the countryside is over. The restoration has begun.
They're about to the top. They're controlling the crowd.
The ground in Manchester didn't just shake from the weight of thousands of boots this weekend, it trembled with the collective heartbreak of a nation that no longer recognises its own city centres. While the Prince of Darkness and the establishment elite play a game of sleaze on steroids in Westminster, the streets of the North became a theatre of physical discord. Thousands of patriots gathered to fly the Union Jack in a peaceful remigration march, only to be met by a wall of masked radical factions and the hollow thud of a fist hitting home. This isn't just a rally, it is a visible internal fracture. Why is the government rewarding institutional failure with knighthoods, while the people who built this country are treated like suspects in their own streets? Today, we are exposing the shadow play that allows the state to monitor your tweets while ignoring the ideological rot tearing our communities apart.
The scenes in Manchester were a masterclass in societal friction. At 9:33 a.m, the streets belonged to the British nationalist, a sea of Union Jacks, and a demand for national sovereignty. But as the march moved toward the city centre, the managed decline of public order became absolute. Masked groups, characterised by what many call the SSRI stare, launched a coordinated offensive to block the route. The nail in this narrative is the sovereign paradox. In any other country, flying the national flag is a sign of unity. In the UK, the establishment has politicised the fabric to ensure it looks like a crime. While Jeremy Corbyn and the shadow architects looked on, the streets descended into a security standoff that left 9 people in custody and the public's trust at an all-time low. To understand the anger, you have to look at the institutional betrayal. We are living in a time where the state rewards mediocrity and failure with titles, knighting mayors who preside over decline and managers who preside over loss. It is a categorical inversion of British values. While the elite celebrate their Sir titles, the patriots of the North are dealing with a 340% surge in sharp instrument offences and a housing strategy that prioritises the unvetted arrival over the British veteran. This isn't an accident, it is a tactical erasure of the working class. When a council leader tells the public to send a clear message to peaceful protesters, they aren't building cohesion, they are incentivising the friction.
The Manchester clash isn't an isolated incident, it is a European pattern. We've seen the ideological rot claim lives in France with the tragic murder of students like Quinton, yet the BBC and the establishment mouthpiece continue to label any defence of the country as thuggery. The Prince of Darkness in Downing Street remains ideologically tethered to a legal framework that makes sovereign action impossible. They would rather let garrison towns burn than admit that their remigration fears are becoming a mainstream reality. The maths of the mud has moved to the maths of the pavement, and the numbers are no longer adding up for the Starmer administration.
The red smoke in Manchester has cleared, but the national discontent is now a permanent feature of the landscape. We are witnessing a deadlock between a shadow elite that thinks everything has a price and a sovereign patriot who knows that some things are not for sale. The government can issue dispersal orders and they can liquidate the relationships of anyone who speaks out, but they cannot delete the feeling of a nation waking up. The curiosity of the viewer shouldn't be about whether the arrests will stop, but whether there is anything left of the social contract to save. The last orders for the old guard have been called. The question is, whose streets will they be tomorrow?
The room fell silent the moment the question was asked. No headlines, no slogans, no political choreography, just a blunt demand echoing across the committee floor. When will the migrant hotels finally close? Within seconds, the tension tightened, and for the first time in months, the Prime Minister found himself cornered. What followed was not just another parliamentary exchange, but a collision between a government under pressure and a system buckling under its own weight. This was the clearest glimpse yet into the immigration firestorm, now engulfing Britain. A crisis of overcrowded hotels, anxious communities and policies struggling to keep pace with reality. And one unsettling question is now gripping Westminster. Has Keir Starmer lost control of Britain's borders?
We do want, asylum hotels were at their height measured, I think it was 400 or so. They're down to about 200 now. I'm absolutely determined that we will close them by the end of this Parliament, sooner if it's possible, and that's why military sites are under consideration.
Can you understand the how local residents feel and the uncertainty there is? They've been told that they've been identified as a site. They don't know when it's going to open. They don't know what the clientele are going to be, and there is real concern. And the MPs that represent those areas have made representations to me as chair of the Select Committee. We really need to understand how this is going to affect local areas. Can you sympathise with that?
I do understand that.
It began with what sounded like an ordinary inquiry into accommodation planning, but it escalated with remarkable speed. MPs pressed the Prime Minister to explain why hundreds of asylum seekers remained in hotels despite repeated promises to shut them, and why military sites in Catterick, Crowborough and Inverness were being prepared quietly in the background. The committee chair pushed harder, warning that local residents had been briefed without receiving any timelines, impact assessments or even basic information. Many felt blindsided and abandoned. Starmer attempted to calm the room, repeating his pledge that the government wants to close them by the end of this Parliament. Yet as he spoke, it became painfully clear that this was no longer a question of policy, but of credibility. Communities are living with uncertainty, MPs said, and the government could not keep hiding behind vague assurances. When Starmer insisted that he had inherited record levels of claims and that the system was finally being repaired, the room did not soften. Instead, the exchange exposed a reality the government has tried hard to downplay: the sense that Britain's asylum system has drifted dangerously close to breaking point, while ministers scramble to regain control. Outside the walls of Parliament, the numbers paint an even sharper picture. More than 41,000 people arrived by small boat last year, one of the highest totals ever recorded, and a 13% increase from the year before. The promise to stop the boats now rings hollow to many voters who feel the crisis is worsening rather than stabilising. Hotels, which were supposed to be an emergency measure, remain packed. Attempts to phase them out have been overwhelmed by the continuing rise in arrivals and the slow processing of claims. And now the public is being told that military bases may need to be converted into holding centres, a move that has sparked controversy from Kent to Scotland. There is also the issue of new border enforcement powers, such as the authority to seize and inspect migrants' mobile phones. This measure, designed to dismantle smuggling networks and verify identities, has triggered a fierce backlash from human rights groups, who warn that Britain is sliding into a climate of surveillance anxiety. For a government elected on the promise of competence and control, these developments cut deep. They reinforce the perception of a state constantly reacting, never anticipating, and struggling to translate its pledges into results. Across the UK, the emotional temperature is rising. Residents in coastal towns and inland communities alike say they feel left in the dark, unsure when or how new arrivals will be placed in their area. Many emphasise that their frustration is not directed at the migrants themselves, but at what they describe as an atmosphere of disorder. They want clarity, transparency, and planning, not sudden announcements delivered after decisions have already been made. This sense of neglect has reignited tensions that erupted during the anti-immigration protests of 2025. Some demonstrations were peaceful, others turned hostile, forcing police to brace for new flashpoints. Councillors report that public meetings have become increasingly heated, with tempers fraying and fears spreading quickly online. At the political level, the pressure is intensifying. Reform UK is capitalising on public anger, presenting Labour as weak on borders. The Conservatives accuse Starmer of hiding behind bureaucratic defences. Even Labour supporters privately acknowledge that the government is wobbling on one of the issues voters care most deeply about. All of these undercurrents were on display during the committee confrontation. The MP's scepticism, the Prime Minister's strained responses, and the atmosphere of restrained frustration reflected a country on edge, a nation that feels its asylum system has drifted beyond its control. Starmer's defence rests on a single line that the last government left behind a broken system and Labour is now fixing it. He argues that claim processing is improving and that the hotel numbers will drop as reforms take hold. Yet outside the committee room, the public is growing impatient. People want to see arrivals fall, hotels close, and a sense of order restored. Instead, they see a system still pushed to capacity. Military bases quietly prepared in the background and legal battles gathering pace over Britain's obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights. Trust is eroding, and each fresh surge of arrivals deepens the impression that the government is responding to events rather than shaping them. In this context, the committee clash felt like a moment of reckoning. It forced Starmer to defend not just his policies but his authority. It also raised a deeper concern that no minister could brush aside whether Britain's borders are being governed by strategy or by crisis management. As the hearing drew to a close, Starmer attempted to reclaim the narrative by insisting that the priority must be reducing claim numbers so that hotels and temporary sites become unnecessary. But the looks exchanged among MPs suggested little confidence that the government could deliver on that promise. When the Prime Minister left the room, questions lingered in the air, not only inside Westminster, but across the country. If Labour cannot bring this system under control, what comes next? And how long before the tension spilling out in committee rooms begins to spill onto Britain's streets? Britain is standing at a knife edge. The migrant hotel scandal, far from fading, is becoming a symbol of a deeper, more structural crisis. And the most unsettling question remains unanswered. How close is Britain to a full-scale border breakdown? And what happens if the system finally gives way?